Hello and welcome to CorpusCast, part of the Aston Originals family, providing fresh perspectives from Aston University experts. My name is Robbie Love, and I'm a lecturer in English language here at Aston University. I'm a corpus linguist, meaning that I study linguistic patterns, trends, and variation using large samples of language data. Now, CorpusCast is a show all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. In this new series, I'll be speaking with top researchers in the field to find out more about how corpus linguistics can be applied to a diverse range of areas, including health, social justice, education, and many others. In this episode of CorpusCast, our topic is how corpus linguistics contributes to research about education. I'll be speaking to Pascual Pérez-Paredes, Professor of Applied Linguistics and Linguistics at the University of Murcia in Spain. Pascual has research interests in learner language variation, the use of corpora and digital resources in language education, and more recently, corpus-assisted discourse analysis. Today, we'll be having a chat about his work in applying corpus linguistics to a range of educational contexts. So I'm very pleased at this time to welcome Pascual Pérez-Paredes to CorpusCast. Pascual, hello, welcome, great to see you.
Hi, Robbie. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on to CorpusCast to have a chat. We're going to start with a couple of questions about your own relationship with corpus linguistics. We'll try to, and I ask all my guests this question to explain in general terms how corpus linguistics is involved in your work. What does corpus linguistics mean to you?
Well, that's a great question and a very difficult to answer at the same time. I suppose corpus linguistics is a powerful set of tools and research methods to look at language use. In my case, I sort of find that the same toolbox of tools and methods can be used with both L1 and L2 languages. So this is something that allows me to look at usage, language use from different camps. One camp is in descriptive linguistics, if you will, or linguistics, and the other is in language learning. So both camps, in a way, allow us researchers and linguists to look at variation and the circumstances that shape up language use. I suppose I can quote here Tony McInerney in a recent interview, or better, in a recent conversation that Jill Mark and myself had with Tony McInerney and Professor Mike McCarthy. And he said something which I think is really interesting. He said that some people feel stunned that we linguists sometimes don't use data to look at language. And this is something that you forget when you become a corpus linguist, I suppose. So yeah, it's this interest in data that really is something that we do every day.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you, on a personal level, how did you get involved in corpus linguistics in your career as a researcher?
My main interest back in the, I suppose, mid-90s was applied linguistics and language learning. I was teaching adults back then, and I mean people, from 16-year-olds to people in their 60s or 70s, right? So that was my target group. So as you can imagine, that was a very interesting situation and context to teach languages. So I became really interested in how people of different ages actually process and use language. So that was something that caught my attention back then. So I wanted to look at this learning process, and I started to look at the role of emotion in language learning. And then I became involved in in the work of Professor Elaine Horwich at the University of Texas at Austin. So I went there. I remember that was, I think, 1998, if I remember well. Back then, the internet was not huge. I mean, you could use the internet for email and all that, but certainly you couldn't find everything on the internet as you can do now. So I spent some time there, and I learned more about factor analysis. And as you can imagine, factor analysis and data reduction techniques, so much used in looking at the psychometric properties of surveys in psychology and in some applied linguistics research, that in a way led me to an interest in the use of factor analysis in language research. And this is how I discovered multidimensional analysis. And to me, that was the beginning of my love and interest and passion for corpus linguistics. Basically, I can say that is discovering that you can use data reduction statistics with or for the analysis of language.
Brilliant, and we'll get back to that sticky topic of multidimensional analysis a little bit later on. I want to start by picking a particular theme of your research, and there's a few terms that are related to this: data-driven learning, mobile language learning as a form of data-driven learning, and you've done work building what you might call pedagogic corpora, encouraging learners to actually use corpus data themselves. And this is different to a lot of the discussions of applying corpus linguistics, of course, is about a researcher studying a corpus and finding something out about language, and then telling people about what they found in the corpus as a contribution to knowledge and practice in whatever field they're interested in. But in your context, this strand of your research is actually about getting people who are not academic researchers, and they may be language learners or teachers, for instance, to actually do corpus analysis themselves. So I imagine that's quite a challenging area for those who are not experienced in doing linguistic research, as of course many language students are not. So why don't you tell us more about your work in this area, the creation of pedagogic corpora, and how you try to encourage getting corpus linguistics actually into language learning contexts?
Yeah, well, I have to probably travel back a little bit in time here, and I really have to throw here a few names that were really inspiring in that search. And I want to talk about Henry Widdowson as somebody that started to really look at the use of corpora in a more, let's say, in a critical way. And those that are probably over 40 and certainly 50 will remember fantastic conversations between John Sinclair and Henry Widdowson back in the day. I'm thinking about Talk in Bertinoro, for example, where there was this conversation between Henry Widdowson and applied linguist himself, probably very much concerned about language learning and language teaching methodology and the use of corpus data to sort of promote authentic language learning. And of course, John Sinclair representing the major, I suppose, work in the field of corpus linguistics certainly in the 90s and in the early 2000s. So one of the things that Henry Widdowson was worried is that the use of corpus data, such as, for example, corpus data from the BNC, the British National Corpus, that could possibly not be representative or authentic to language learners in a sort of mainstream learning classroom context. And I remember also back then a nice paper by, I think it's Mission 2004, Mission 2005, where there was a discussion of authenticated contexts, and of course the work of Sabina Brown at that time in the University of Tübingen, talking about early efforts to sort of make corpus data more palatable to language learners, not only in higher education, but also in secondary education. Back then, the idea was to sort of try to promote the use of corpus research methods in a way in the language classroom with the use of data that could be representative, not the main variety, for example, of English as spoken in the UK, or Italian as spoken in Italy, or Spanish as spoken in Spain, blah, blah. But the language that is representative of the sort of tasks and functions, communicative functions that language learners needed for their language learning. So this is how these two projects came in a way to be. I'm talking about SACO-DALE. That is a terrible acronym. I know that I forgot the whole acronym myself. Something like System-Aided Compilation and Distribution of European Youth Language. That was a European project where we put together a corpus of interviews with secondary school learners in 7 languages, including, as I said, Italian, English, French, German, Lithuanian, Romanian. And in a way, those interviews were based on the sort of curriculum that language teachers across Europe felt was needed for their language teaching and language learning in real secondary school classrooms. So the idea was to take advantage of both the know-how that we gained through trying to put together representative corpora of, for example, English or other languages, but this time trying to focus on the L2 classroom. So this is how we put together these corpora. As you can imagine, I'm talking about 2008 here, around 2008. So that was a very, early days in terms of technology and the internet. So much of the product is not available anymore in terms of the multimodal interviews or videos. The whole text can be accessed through different websites. And the interesting idea is here that we can use pedagogic annotation. So one layer of these sort of distribution of the corpus was the pedagogic annotation carried out by language teachers themselves. So they annotated every single interview, as we call them, every single section in interview. Bearing in mind pedagogic uses of those short parts of the interviews. So as you can see, this is an application of both corpus design sort of know-how compilation, but also an application of some of the methodologies that were available back then in terms of using, for example, the TEI initiative in terms of annotating the corpora, and also trying to favor a more language learning oriented sort of search environment where learners could not only search for words or string of words, but where they could search for example, topics of interest in terms of the language learning, such as, for example, talking about the holidays or talking about the environment, as you can imagine, is one of all. These are the representative of some of the functions, communicative functions, that we all need when we are learning languages, for example, in secondary education. I'm talking about anything between A2 and B2 levels. So yeah, that was the SACO-DALE project back then, that was complemented by the Backbone project that looked more specifically at these languages, plus a corpus of English as a lingua franca, contributed by professionals across the board, just researchers, engineers, people working in small shops that spoke about some of the topics that we felt were of interest to just professionals across Europe. So we use the same sort of methodology and the same pedagogic corpora principles that I talked about earlier. So in a way, what I really find of interest is how we were able to transform the idea of representative corpora into representative corpora in language learning, which, as you can see, they are different things. So we are not talking here about representative, in a way, youth language. So our main drive was not to capture the wide range of different ways in which, for example, young people, secondary school learners spoke across different languages, but our interest was in developing a corpus of multimodal corpora where learners could actually see good examples that could be authenticated against some of the learning tasks that they could find in their classroom environment. So I think this is an interesting application of corpus linguistics in this case, the language education. And I think there is room for a wide variety of similar applications, and not only in language learning, but also in other areas of education.
So this is really interesting. You sort of started relatively early on in the I suppose wave of research that's sort of suggesting it could be a good idea for language learners to be able to play with linguistic data sets themselves, particularly, as you say, in this case, it's not necessarily a corpus of the target language variety, but a corpus of how learners like themselves are using the target language. In general, I've seen research that has talked about the benefits and the limitations or the challenges of spreading the word about data-driven learning. Obviously, you said you started this work some time ago when computer technology, the internet, etc., was not, of course, as widespread as it is now. Some of the challenges I've heard are relating to a lack of confidence in being able to use the technology, for instance, or not necessarily understanding how looking at large samples of data might be able to help. Do you still see that as the case now? Do you see that data-driven learning is being embraced more so now, or are there still barriers in your experience that still make it difficult to argue in favor of that approach?
Well, if we look at research in data-driven learning, what we find, I think, is the opposite. I suppose we see that there is more and more interest coming from just across the board. So we're talking here about more languages are being used in data-driven learning, and as it used to be English dominated sort of landscape, so to speak. Now you see more and more languages that also are benefit from data-driven learning, and I suppose that research is in a way is telling us that data-driven learning is a very effective way to look at or to examine usage in the classroom. I think there is a couple of areas that probably need further attention. I think most of the research, I'm thinking about here the meta-analysis by Alex Bolton and and others that have looked at the amount of research in this area. And it seems that most of his research is looking at university students. And as I said earlier, it's English. And I want to add here that is in the context of writing instruction. So probably we know quite a lot about data-driven learning in this area, but I think we need further research that is looking at, for example, data-driven learning in other areas. I'm thinking about, for example, the work by Gregory Hadley and associates looking at data-driven learning and reading, extensive reading. So they've had a kind of a 4-year project looking at the impact of data-driven learning on extensive reading, which is fantastic research, new insights into that area. And but also I'm thinking about what you said about technology. We know that the emphasis is slightly moving from technology to learning. So while I agree that the emphasis was on technology, let's say, I don't know, like 2 decades ago, I find that there is less and less, in a way, teachers and researchers worried about the impact of using these technologies in the language classroom. And one of the reasons why I think probably one of the reasons why things like or corpora like Sakote are not usable, these days. I mean, in practical terms, right? It's because you depend on a wide range of different technologies. You need to access the internet, and then you need to download that file, and then you need to download a media player that can play that particular file. So where the expectation in education these days is that you draw your tablet and you simply make use of the resources that are available to you. And so that expectation probably is telling us that probably that's the way forward. And in a way, if we want to make full use of the opportunities that language learning in the 21st century can offer to educators, we really need to move our infrastructure to web services that can really take advantage of mobile devices. So in a way, I think we are no longer in a position where, and I'm here thinking about Stephen Bach's normalization theory in computer-assisted language learning. So his emphasis was on how to normalize the use of computers in the language learning classroom. So I'm thinking that research now, again, 21st century, well into the third decade of the 21st century, tells us is that probably teachers and certainly language learners no longer worry about, the logistics behind deploying or using corpora. So the corpora are expected to be available through your web browser, and I think that's really good news. I think we probably, just to finish, probably we educators, we need to do a better job in terms of how we think about interfaces. And here I want to think about work that I contributed with my own research team, but also I want to think about research by Nina Vyatkina and also Fanny Munir that sort of discuss how to bring data-driven learning to the classroom in a way that is, again, it's more palatable and it is something that both teachers and learners want to use.
So from what you're saying, it seems like we're moving away from, here's a program that you need to download, here's the data that you need to download, and you need to follow a million steps before you can actually get on to doing the task. Now it's kind of a pick up and play model where you take whatever device you have, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a laptop or a machine, whatever, and it's all there on the browser and much easier to access, I guess, much more user-friendly. which I think is, I agree. I think that's absolutely the way to go. Thank you. That's really interesting. I want to move on to another strand of your research. You have an interest in spoken data, spoken learner data. I also have an interest in spoken data, but spoken L1 English data, but spoken corpora are near and dear to my heart as well. You've done a lot of work on adverbs, which, as your research and the research of others has shown convincingly, they perform an awful lot of very, very useful functions in spoken communication, many more than people would probably first think. So what interests you about adverbs in the context of learner language? Why are they so important? And what have you learned in your research into adverbs?
Well, I suppose my interest in adverbs probably spring out of a curious mind that is interested in why adverbs are so marginal in language education, as opposed to other word classes. Of course, we're talking here about nouns and verbs. I mean, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But clearly, adverbs still are my impression, and my understanding, Robbie, is that you have a nice paper with Niall Curry and Olivia Goodman on this one, which is really, really interesting. And so
Thank you.
no, yeah, it's you bring here an interest in what the publishing houses, major publishing houses, do with adverbs and the sort of data which is available in terms of corpora out there, and how this is streamlined into major publications. And to be honest, I'm also interested in that area myself. And well, I suppose there is two layers of interest here. One is what learners do when they, for example, write an essay, or they take part in a oral interview, and how they use adverbs in this context. And of course, this context is a context where adverbs are not elicited, right? So they are observed, but we are not seeking to elicit adverbs. So as opposed to other research methodologies where probably researchers are trying to elicit adverb driven or adverb rich responses, right? So we are trying to look at how this natural use of adverbs in the language classroom looks like. So that's been a part of my research in the last years, and I really have to say here that of course all of this research is mediated by the availability of corpora. So I've been using, in terms of spoken data, my main corpus has been the Lindsay, developed by UCL. And the team led by Sylvia and Granger, which is a fantastic resource to explore spoken language. And in terms of written language, I've looked more at the ICCI, led by Yukio Tono, and really very international corpus data. When I say very international, I mean some countries that are not usually represented in most corpora are part of these of this corpus, and also a corpus that looks at very young writers of, in this case, English, right? So if I was to summarize my main findings, probably you would think, well, that's not really very exciting. My main findings are it takes at least 7 or 8 years of instruction for learners to start using corpora in writing. overuse and underuse phenomena, of course, are observed in spoken data. And here we could talk about the use of teddy bear adverbs and so on, and the lack of sophistication in the use of some of the adverbs, such as, for example, the use of actually, for example, in spoken L2 language. But also, I was thinking that from a more theoretical perspective, just looking at these sort of underuse, for example, is really misleading to the general public, as these discussions about underuse are not just looking at, let's say, the low frequency. So what is really interesting here is the strategies that are used by learners to sort of compensate this lack of engagement with the particular use of an adverb that in normal circumstances would be used by an L1 speaker. And that is, quote unquote, quote unquote, everything that I say here, because all of these findings are, of course, based on the exploration of L1 corpora that, of course, offer and present limitations. So, and I was thinking that probably the most striking and interesting finding here is how these small words are used in language teaching. How little attention they are paid in language teaching.
Really?
And how small room they get in textbooks or in, everyday teaching. So they're typically dismissed as words that can be translated into one adverb in the L2 language, or in the L1 language of the L2 learners. And that, in a way, simplifies the fabric of spoken communication, how complex the fabric of spoken communication tends to be. So, in a way, let me link back to the notion of pedagogy corpora that we discussed earlier on, and those efforts to bring in even small amount of data. I mean, in terms of thousands or even thousands of words to the language classroom. Here, these pedagogy corpora can serve as a great starting point to examine some of the most interesting cases where small words are used by, in this case, L1 speakers, and show a way in which these could potentially be used by L2 learners if they feel this is something that they may want to use as well. And finally, I want to say that there is a nice wealth of research that shows that there is a lack of understanding on about raised awareness in language education, which I think, and probably we will discuss this in a few minutes, I think we are in a very good position to sort of try to do something about it, thanks to the range of tools that we can use when talking about corpus applications in language education.
Absolutely, that's really interesting. You're right that there's so much that, of course, so many functions that adverbs perform, and yet they don't get the attention that they deserve. So it's good to see that you're sticking up for the little the little words that that ought to deserve more attention. Now I want to move on to I promised myself that we wouldn't get bogged down in technical methodological conversations here on CorpusCast, and I'm going to try and stick to my promise. However, you have done a lot of work with multidimensional analysis, which is a very well-established approach or series of approaches in corpus linguistics, and has been for many decades. Students of corpus linguistics who are new to the field often get a bit put off by this because it's relatively more technical compared to some of the other methods that are introduced in the study of language. So this might be a challenge to kind of talk about it without talking about it, but what can you learn by counting up lots of the frequencies of lots of different linguistic features, grammatical features, frequency data, etc.? What can you learn by counting them up and comparing them across lots of different texts? I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, that's another great question. I wish I could have an hour or so.
Well, we'll have to have you back on,
All
obviously.
right. Well, that's a great question. Well, I suppose we can. I mean, this is. I suppose this is the beauty about using corpus linguistics. So you can be as much, microscopic, so to speak, as you want. So, for example, you could look at actually uses in corpus data. So you could actually go deeper into, for example, you could examine every single use, and you could try to understand every sort of pragmatic function behind the use of actually, something that I've done myself, and I really find really interesting. But of course, this is something that you can do within the limits of, for example, as in this case, one adverb and a very small data set, I suppose. Yeah. So what happens when you can, instead of looking at one single linguistic feature or lexical item, you can look at all of them. So this is beautiful because you can make use of data reduction techniques.
Yeah.
All right. And this is where we can benefit from, for example, in factor analysis. So when we talk about multidimensional analysis, really we're talking about factor analysis applied to the analysis and the study of features, linguistic features in texts or across texts. And so what you can get here is the opposite. You can gain a wider picture. You get the large picture of what's going on in terms of how different features are used in terms of frequency, but also how those frequencies are distributed across different texts. And that gives you a very unique perspective of the text as something that goes beyond the use of discrete lexical items, such as the case of actually. So just to give you a very probably, I suppose, this is just an example, right? So I in the Lindsay corpus that I mentioned earlier, there is a sort of task where learners both learners, but also English L1 speakers or native speakers look at a story in 4 pictures. I mean, the nature of what's going on there is not totally clear, although there is some, if you've seen the picture, you know what I mean. Maybe I can give you the picture later. I don't know. So what's going on there is that there is a lady that is being painted by a painter, and obviously the lady is not happy with the final painting. So I mean, you can hypothesize as much as you want here, and of course you can throw in your imagination here and go as far as you want, of course. But it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so what we have here is interesting data in terms of how people, both L1 speakers and L2 speakers, reconstruct what's going on in these pictures. All right. So what happens is when we look at what learners do and what, in this case, English L1 speakers do, is really interesting when you use, for example, multidimensional analysis. In other words, when we use a factor analysis, a data reduction technique that in a way tells us about the frequencies of different linguistic features and how those linguistic features actually are distributed across the different texts in single data sets. So, for example, what happens with Spanish speakers when they describe what's going on here is that they make use of a sort of spoken English that is very involved in its nature. So they use lots of, as Doug Biber calls them, private verbs, so opinion verbs. So the frequency of opinion verbs is mind-blowing. When you look at what L1 English speakers do here, is that, well, they use the sort of expected amount of opinion verbs in terms of face-to-face interaction. So, okay, you may say, well, that's something which is not very interesting. And I can tell you here that it is very interesting, because when you look at the different underlying dimensions of use, you understand what's going on here. So, for example, let me just very briefly talk about Spanish speakers in the Lindsay while they sort of look at these four pictures and describe what's going on here. So they use a type of production that is very involved. So if I give you like a score of, for example, in this case, it's 38.9, that's the mean score for this, let's say, factor or dimension of use. And I tell you that English L1 speakers, they get a mean of 24.6. That means nothing, but I mean, simply by looking at these two numbers, but you can really tell that there is a huge difference in terms of how Spanish speakers make use of these involvement features in a situation which is not expected, because I mean you are expected to tell a story here of what's going on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they show fewer features of narrative English than English speakers. So the mean score in that dimension is, so different between L1 speakers and L2 speakers. L1 English speakers are so much more situation dependent. Spanish speakers are so much more explicit about the situation. English L1 speakers are not at all persuasive about their version of what's going on in the story. Spanish speakers, they really try very hard to be persuasive. So most of this, and I will stop there. So this is telling you that there is lots of things going on here in terms of the use of the language that are not easily met by the eye just by looking at the frequency of this adverb or that particular noun or preposition. When you gain this sort of perspective, you see how different reasons or underlying dimensions of use, as Dr. Biber calls them, how they actually interplay and interface with each other. And in a way, these may contribute each one to sort of protecting a view of these L2 use as opposed to what is expected from L1 use based on, the frequencies that we sort of expect to be there in a particular type of discourse. I mean, this is interesting because we don't normally, even in our L1, we don't usually describe pictures, right? This is like, in a way, it's sort of, a very interesting kind of elicitation task. But I think this is just the beginning where you can start to look at, again. Don't get me wrong. This is not something that we researchers, and you know this very well, we do just to show how deficient L2 language is. That's not the main drive here. We're trying to understand how learning works. All right. So and to do that, we corpus linguists, we have decided to look at usage.
And by understanding better how learning works, we can promote better practices in teaching. And by identifying some of these really otherwise undetectable linguistic gaps between languages, which often relates also, of course, to culture and other related issues, you can then go in presumably into teaching materials and say, okay, when Spanish L1 Spanish speakers are learning English as a second language, they, the I suppose the categories of words at a conceptual level that they might use in a certain situation in Spanish should not just be directly translated into their English equivalent. There's a gap there that you're identifying, a bridge that must be crossed when switching from one language to another, which is fascinating. I think that's such a clear sort of picture of the power of these sorts of approaches. So thank you for sharing that. As we start to wrap up, and goodness, we could talk about this all day, I'm sure. I want to touch a little bit on the work that you've done to try to encourage practitioners and researchers in education broadly, but of course language education particularly, to incorporate corpus linguistics in some way. We talked about DDL, but of course in research themselves, and there are a lot of teachers that are known as they're doing research as well themselves, sometimes in their own practice. You recently published a book called Corpus Linguistics for Education, a guide for research, which I read and found really, really, really interesting. I think that book may have been published almost a year ago now, potentially, or thereabouts. What's the sort of reception been in terms of people who've had a chance to look at it? And have you heard from people who've sort of said, oh, I never really knew anything about this before, but someone sort of recommended this book, and now I'm starting to, have you noticed any? It might be a bit early, of course, because obviously, as we know, the publication process and dissemination can be very slow, and sometimes you don't notice the effect of the work you've done for many years. So, but I wonder if you've had any early reception so far from that work.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Again, I suppose we are living strange times as we speak.
Of course, yeah.
So, it's just incredible how mediated are the way we talk to other people now are by, I suppose, the internet and electronic communication, and this is a very good instance.
Yeah, exactly.
Of that. Yeah, I've been contacted by really quite a few faculties here and there that really want me to speak about corpus linguistics in their research methods programs. And I think that was one of the original ideas behind this book. All right.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
So yeah. So it was. I was teaching a corpus linguistics session in the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge, and I thought maybe it's a good idea to just to write something about it. So that was the original, or one of the original motivations to write the book. So to sort of try to bring this book, or to trying to bring corpus linguistics methods to a wider audience, I suppose. So in that way, I think it's been successful in attracting the attention of players outside corpus linguistics. Also, I think most of my thinking time in this book was in two areas. One area was pretty obvious, was trying to make these as palatable as possible to anybody dealing with especially corpus annotation. And of course, I would talk about keyword analysis. So, I mean, of course, it's really something you really need to give a sense of a very powerful research method that you can use, but also you need to to throw some caution there in terms of how this is used if you are serious about your research and you want to use this in a robust way. So that was one of the reasons, one of the areas that really occupied my time while writing. The other was to really think about what does corpus linguistics mean or have to offer to, for example, educators that, for example, make use of this typical scenario where there are interviews and interviews are analyzed thematically. So what is new about the use of corpus linguistic research methods for these researchers that are so comfortable and so happy using, for example, I don't know, MVivo, for example, for their analysis or thematic analysis, and for example, where MVivo also offers a automatic counting, word counting, and frequency counting. So that's probably the area that took me longer to really to think about, right? And if I am totally honest with you, I think this is a fascinating area that I think in my case, I have just started to think about, and I hope that this is a sort of conversation that we will have in the future with more researchers across different areas. But I feel that in a way, I really find it fascinating that, for example, in the social sciences and in education, for example, as well, language has been and is the primary source of qualitative analysis. I think that we will agree there. But however, usage has remained invisible. So it is, it is kind of a sort of parallel universe where in a universe there is an interest in language, but usage is neglected. And there is this another parallel universe, the universe of corpus linguists, where all we care about is usage and some of the forces that shape up usage, like frequency or recency and distribution. And well, of course, if you are or if you practice usage-based theories, there's a whole range of interesting stuff to look at here. So, but these two universes, of course, they are parallel, so they don't talk to each other. So, in a way, what I was trying to do here is I was trying to sort of get across the message that usage does matter. So the words we choose matter because the words we think we choose are shaped by social conventions and the way we are exposed to discourses around particular topics and particular areas of the topics that we talk about or the feelings that we want to convey or discuss or describe. Right. So I really find that this is a very fertile area that really needs more attention in the social sciences. And I think that corpus linguists here can probably contribute to increasing the appreciation of, what is the impact of usage on the way data is collected and analyzed in the social sciences. And of course, there is the impact of research methods, like, for example, keyword analysis for the analysis of even, something which could be pretty close to thematic analysis. So I think that is a really interesting area that really needs more attention. And also, I think that if I have one minute here, Robbie, I want to say that in a way, corpus linguistics is very well situated to do this, as now there is an interest in, there is this notion that we are surrounded by data, that big data, for the good or for the bad, is all around us. And I don't think we corpus linguists are afraid of the big data revolution in any way. I think in a way we are ready.
Yeah.
So it's kind of big data. Come on, bring it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we are not scared. But at the same time, we also we know very well that there is these. I'm here talking about education. There is these new ecologies for reading and writing, and these new ecologies are digital ecologies of reading and writing. So there is this interface for us corpus linguists to really make an impact in terms of how this is researched and how we, in a way, we can interface and also be a sort of a stakeholder in the conversations that, let's call them computer scientists and the society has. And I think we can contribute our understanding of usage and language as something that is situated socially and discourses, which is something that probably is not obvious to data scientists. So yeah, in a way, I feel that's both. It's the beauty of the work that we have ahead, and also it's the big challenge that
big
that we
challenge indeed. Thank you. Okay, we're going to wrap things up now with 3 quick fire questions. The questions are quick, but we'll see if the answers are quick as well. First one, what is the biggest change that you've noticed in corpus research during your own career?
Okay, so yeah, I'll be brief. So I suppose one is we've become more sophisticated in 2 different ways. We've become more sophisticated in how we interface corpus analysis and corpus linguistics research methods and theory. And when I talk about theory, for example, I'm talking about language learning theory, such as usage-based theories, but also I'm talking about, I don't know, discourse analysis, like representation theory, or I've become interested in Bev Skegg's person value theory to look at migration discourses, for example, with my colleague Elena Remigi. So that's one change. So we become more sophisticated in how we interface with, theories, right? And also, I think that the overall quality and the standard of our research, I think, has in a way benefited from increasing sophistication in how we use quantitative methods in our research, but also we become more sophisticated in sort of trying to tell society about our findings. And I suppose this podcast or video cast is a good example of that, right? So I think this is something that was unthinkable just a few years ago.
Thank you. That's a good point. What has surprised you the most about your work in corpus linguistics personally?
Well, I suppose is how versatile corpus linguistics research methods can be, and how they have the potential to interest a wide range of scientists or researchers across the board. So yeah, last month I was in the University of Minho in Portugal, giving a workshop on using corpus linguistics to research hate speech. And it was really interesting to see these linguists and NLP professionals in a way just trying to understand how they could benefit from using corpus linguistics methods and looking at things again from a more usage-based perspective. And I think I really believe that corpus linguistics research methods have these presents this affordance. It can be of potential interest to a very wide range of scientists. So, yeah, to be honest, this has surprised me because back, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, probably I thought of corpus linguistics as a very sort of very small area of research that could only be of interest to all of us doing corpus linguistics. Yeah.
And finally, looking to the future, how will corpus linguistics, I should say, continue to make an impact on the world in the future? Where do you think we're going?
Well, yeah, I think as I said, I think we are in a position to become sort of relevant actors in a future where I suppose digital communication will be dominant, meaning that most of communication is online, and there will be a blend of text and image and sound that can be analyzed. So I think we are, as I said, in a very good position to be relevant actors there. But I think we also need to increase our understanding of NLP and artificial intelligence, such as machine learning. So to sort of try to understand how we can contribute to this big revolution that is happening right now. I'm thinking about people like Scott Crossley, Chris Kyle. I think they are leading the way in which the way how we can do this. But I think we can also talk about maybe our own PhD students. They now come with all sorts of new toolboxes, like, I don't know, data mining methods. Some of them know how to program in Python, and they make use of R. So that's so refreshing, and of course, all of these can only be of interest because we can probably build on the work of people like John Sinclair, Michael Hui, Tony McHenry, Stephen Grease, and the like. So I'm really positive about the impact that we can make in the future, whatever the future is. But I think we can interface with this big revolution that is certainly taking place as we speak, and which makes use of language, but doesn't look at language, and of course doesn't take into account usage in looking at language. So yeah, pretty much I think we have a role there.
That's an optimistic way to end the episode. Thank you very much, Pascual. This has been really, really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. Of course, for those of you watching, if you're interested in learning more about corpus linguistics research going on here at Aston, then you can follow the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group on Twitter at Aston Corpus. This brings us to the end of our episode of CorpusCast. So once again, Pascual Pérez-Paredes, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Robbie. And congratulations on this initiative.
Thank you.